Distinguished guests, good morning. I'm very happy to be here, and there's so many people in this coming to this venue, so thank you very much for that. The World Bank Group is invested in supporting the private sector in its effort to curb carbon emission. Low and middle income countries need billions of dollars in investment to fight climate change and transition to the green economy. Carbon credits have a potential to mobilize substantial private capital in support of climate action and development. Unfortunately, these markets are facing issues. These issues have resulted in significant trust deficit, which has hindered market participation and slowed decarbonization efforts. The World Bank Group has been supporting countries by providing technical assistance and financing to enable the generation and sale of high-integrity carbon credits. As part of this effort, MIGA has engaged extensively with carbon market participants to identify the role guarantees can serve in catalyzing private investment. Our market feedback has pointed to the need for MIGA guarantees to mitigate key risks associated with delivery, use, and quality of carbon markets. However, a lack of legal clarity on carbon ownership rights and recourse measures has made it difficult for MIGA to get involved. As a result, MIGA, working with our partners, has developed a letter of authorization template to better define carbon rights for private investors. The LOA is designed to mitigate political risk and will secure insurable rights which can be covered by MIGA guarantees. It is also part of the LOA package that the World Bank is launching at COP this year. We recognize the participation in carbon markets require a clear country-level governance framework for operationalizing carbon markets. The MIGA LOA and the LOA package broadly will be a key component of enabling countries to accelerate private investment to support carbon projects. This is just the beginning of our effort to support carbon projects to excite the private investment in developing countries. So thank you for your support. Now I'd like to invite Dirk Forrister, President of CEO of International Emission Trading Association, to the podium to give some remarks on the state of legal arrangements and bottlenecks for Article 6 carbon markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Hiroshi, and thank all of you for joining us this morning for a discussion on something that might sound really esoteric, although I'm looking around the room and seeing some familiar lawyer faces, so it's not so esoteric to lawyers and bankers. But for a lot of the average folks here at this COP, they don't necessarily think about the risks that are being created in some of the discussions that are underway on how to take carbon markets forward. We worked really hard collectively across the carbon market community with the World Bank institutions and other friends in attaining an Article 6 in the Paris Agreement, because we recognize to actually stimulate the amount of private sector investment that's required for reaching or staying within the temperature goals, we needed models that could actually be familiar to the private sector, that could inspire companies to invest with confidence, and frankly, to have that cross-border trade that enables us to attach the opportunities for mitigation with the high-cost areas to achieve a more economically efficient result. We did a project with the World Bank Group going back about 4 years ago, looking at the economics of Article 6 after it was passed. And that research, using modeling from the University of Maryland in Washington, D.C., and a modeling team from one of the U.S. national labs, it showed that you could cut the costs of meeting your existing NDCs in half through optimal use of carbon markets, cross-border carbon markets. If you deployed that capital again into further mitigation, you could actually achieve twice as much mitigation. And it really showed that, like, it is this kind of cooperation that matters the most. And I remember a Norwegian negotiator telling me as we were entering the Paris negotiations, if we're not here to talk about what we can do together across borders, why do we need to come to COP? You can talk about what you're doing on your own at home, and we can dial it in. what you need to come to COP for is to talk about how to work together. So I was reflecting earlier today on the origins, at least my origins on these topics. Many of us worked in the CDM markets of the past. The risks of letters of approval in that era were quite low because you could get the letters of approval and you knew the country was going to stick with it because they had the incentive for achieving the or for the receipt of the revenue that was coming in. But when we got to Article 6 and the notion of carbon accounting, where if you export, you actually have to reflect it in your books, the game changed quite a bit, right? There's a bit more risk for all involved. And I remember an event, this is probably 4 or 5 years ago now, when I first met MIGA, and we were talking about the need for someone to step up and cover the risks of a government changing its mind. And at that point in time, it didn't really seem like it was all that material, but you know, we're talking about things like, can you develop a product where there's no actuarial history, right? Can you develop an insurance product? But it came out as one of the top vote getters amongst the private sector participants in this meeting that they viewed this as a material risk in being able to invest at scale. So now, as we move forward in time, and we're here in Baku, one of the negotiating items is still on Article 6, which some folks on the panel may be able to speak to, Benedict. One of the issues is what are the terms and conditions for a country changing its mind, and what would that have on the impact? Well, anytime you introduce that kind of risk, it basically just means the pricing dynamic changes quite a bit. That country may not get as much of the revenue in a particular transaction if it's loaded with risk, because somebody's going to have to be paid to take on that risk. So the more we can standardize the approaches to this, and frankly, in these negotiations, to reduce the range of what the risks are, but also to create models like we see in the LOA that's being premiered today, something that we at IETA are encouraged by, welcome it. We really want to see more of this out there. It really does bring the focus on what does it take to inspire the confidence for businesses to invest at scale. And if we are in a crisis, if we do have an emergency, if there's urgency to the issue, we need to get this thing rolling and get it solved here in Baku. And so, again, really welcome the LOA that's being launched today. I know a lot of my members have had inputs into this, so thanks for your openness in taking account of our comments, but really eager to move into the discussion now to learn more about what we can expect from this. And so with that, Ethiopis, I'm going to pass the baton to Ethiopis Tafara from MIGA to lead this panel discussion of people that know a lot more about it than me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk, for the fantastic scene setter, and good morning, everyone. And welcome to this panel, which is the launch of the MIGA LOA. You know, the fundamentals of markets are similar with those that existed for thousands of years. You need a meeting place for buyers and sellers. You need recognized ownership rights. And most importantly, you need trust, right? And buyers need to have the confidence of what they've purchased and that it will fulfill the purpose for which they bought it. Sellers must trust that the market will provide them with fair compensation, and both sides need to know how disputes will end up getting resolved. And for 35 years, MIGA has been in the business of fostering this essential trust. So in this spirit, we spent the past 9 months engaging with stakeholders across the market and thinking about how is it we could actually address the political risks associated with the revocation of use and delivery of carbon credits. And the result is this LOA. And it creates an enforceable right against which we are prepared to provide insurance using the suite of products that are available to us under this World Bank Group guarantee platform, which was launched on July 1st. And while we can pay out a claim in the event there is a revocation of the right to use or deliver carbon credits, our secret sauce, our special ability is actually being able to step in anytime the government may potentially not be prepared to meet its commitments and actually get them to meet those commitments by virtue of the relationship we have. And in our history, we've supported about 1,000 projects. 200 have been in trouble, but we've only ever paid 11 claims. That means 189 times we're able to step in and resolve the issue so that the government continued to meet its commitment. We have the pleasure today of gathering a number of the leaders of the stakeholders we've engaged with over the course of the past 9 months to give you a sense of how they view this LOA, what the utility they see in it, and to give a sense of how they expect to be able to benefit from the existence of this letter of authorization template. And so let me introduce the panel. Let me start with Margaret Kim, all the way at the very end, who's Chief Executive Officer of Gold Standard, a respected certification body known for setting rigorous criteria to ensure that carbon offsets projects deliver verified, measurable impacts. Next to her is Benedict Chia, who's Director General of the National Climate Change Secretariat of Singapore. Singapore has taken a leading role in advancing climate policy, from pioneering Asia's first carbon tax to fostering regional cooperation on carbon markets. And the National Climate Change Secretariat coordinates the country's climate policies and plays a crucial role in shaping Singapore's approach to sustainable development and carbon pricing. Next to him is Dr. Mary Owens Thomsen, who is Senior Vice President and Chief Economist of the International Air Transport Association, which plays a critical role in the aviation industry's journey towards sustainability. And IATA is working to support effective carbon market mechanisms to help the aviation sector meet its ambitious climate goals. And last but not least, right next to me is Francesco from the International Renewable Energy Agency, or IRENA, which is an international organization dedicated to accelerating the adoption of renewable energy worldwide. And IRENA is working in promoting renewable solutions directly that intersect with carbon markets, as renewables are key to achieving emissions reductions that underpin these markets. So each of them is going to bring a unique perspective to the discussion on the LOA, but in the interest of time, I'm going to dive right in and start with Marie, if you don't mind. Air transport is an important enabler. You and I talked about the importance of aviation in connecting people and connecting markets, and it's fundamental to economic growth, but it also contributes to GHG emissions. And in 2016, governments adopted CORSIA to stabilize emissions from international aviation. So the question to you is, what is the biggest challenge you see with CORSIA compliance?
Well, it seems to me pure speculation, of course, on my part, that the left hand didn't really speak to the right hand when ICAO, so our UN body for civil aviation, indeed created CORSIA in 2016, as you just said. And then this group of people has progressed in its own way. So what we are left with today is an obligation put upon us by ICAO, which we welcome. But the countries on the other side, they are not obliged to release these credits for us. They have optionality. We have an obligation, the countries have optionality. So we're quite literally here to make friends and seduce everybody to the best of our abilities and convince you guys and all the countries involved that it's definitely the smart thing to do to release credits in favor of CORSIA's success and in favor of aviation's decarbonization. So that's our challenge, and we are so absolutely deliriously happy to be able to partner in some way with MIGA and help on our side to facilitate countries to release these credits by supporting with various documentation.
So picking up on that, how do you see the LOA facilitating CORSIA compliance? In what way do you see this template being used as part of the CORSIA regime?
Well, I think that in our experience in our various conversations with countries, many of them sort of are discovering this conundrum that aviation faces, right? So there's first of all an educational mission, like they need to be aware that we have this situation, and often they discover that when we approach them. And then when the conversation deepens, we realize that they do not necessarily know how to go about it. They do not necessarily know the infrastructure that they need to set up or find somewhere else. And this is where we try to, backed, of course, by your inspired leadership, to provide that information and facilitate, and hold hands in this process so that we can reach these goals faster.
Thank you, Marie. Benedict, I'm going to turn to you next to get the sovereign perspective and ask you, what role do you see for insurance products in Singapore's Article 6 approaches?
Well, thanks so much for the question. So Singapore has been pioneering, and we have been advancing Article 6 collaborations. We have got more than signed agreement with more than 20 other countries. We have operationalized one, in the midst of operations another one, and with more in the pipeline. And through all our various discussions, creating the overarching framework where two governments lays out the rules and the modalities of cooperation, and then enabling private sector companies to come in. One of the things that has struck us is that if you look at the entire time frame from when a company needs to invest in a product and in a project, and when the credits are eventually generated, it is quite long. So before you can even generate credits, you need an underlying mitigation emissions reduction project, and that requires upfront investment. In fact, even before the upfront investment, you need to do pre-feasibility studies. And depending on the scale of the project, some of these pre-feasibility studies can cost up to $1 million US, which is not trivial. And then afterwards, you invest in the project, the project happens, the abatement happens, and then credits are being generated. But you don't get the credits until after the emissions reductions are then being verified. So if you look at the entire lifespan from the start, whereby you the pre-feasibility study all the way until the credits comes on hand, it can be a very long period of time depending on the project. 3 all the way up to 6 years is not uncommon itself, if not even longer. So within this very long time span, there are many things that can go wrong. The project might not deliver the abatement you expect. There might be political risk, there might be changes in government, there might be changes in regulation, there might be natural hazards risks, many of which are being exacerbated as we feel more acutely the impact of climate change. And I think this is where we see insurance products coming in to play a very, very important role. The other thing that I think that we have been asked many times and we have looked at quite carefully is, under what circumstances would insurance products be actually useful? And 2 things come out. One is that for it to be useful, the insurance pool needs to be large. So if 2 countries or 3 countries come together and pool their risk together, it's not going to be as effective as 10 to 20 countries coming together. The other factor which is important is that the risk that is pooled should not be systematically correlated to each other. Because if not, it's the same risk, you're paying out at the same time, you're not diversifying the risk. You need sufficiently differentiated pools so that the risks are not correlated, and therefore it allows you to better manage and spread the risk out itself. And these 2 things actually means that working with an organization like MIGA and the World Bank Group is absolutely critical, because only MIGA and the World Bank Group has the ability to convene and to pool together, firstly, a large risk pool, secondly, a risk pool that is sufficiently systematically less correlated. I wouldn't say it's entirely uncorrelated, but the links need not be strong. And then you get a very efficient risk product itself. You get a very cost-effective insurance product. Thanks.
Thank you, Benedict. And you anticipated my second question to you, leaving more time for us to actually get questions from the audience. But before that, Margaret, I'm going to turn to you. And Gold Standard has traditionally served the voluntary carbon market, but in the past few years, you pivoted to also support transactions under Article 6. Can you say more about why you've made the shift towards Article 6 units and how expectations and market requirements change when managing these units?
Thank you. So Gold Standard was established to label CDM credits 20 years ago. So to make sure that CDM credits have robust sustainable development impact attached to it. So that was sort of the origin of how gold standard came about. And obviously we were active in the voluntary carbon market. So I wouldn't say it was a shift per se, but I'm going to put myself in the shoes of a project developer, because I'm not developing a project with a view of I want to access voluntary carbon market today, or I want to access Article 6 today. I start the project because it's a brilliant concept that can mitigate climate impact, that can generate livelihood improvements, that can generate jobs. So that's always in the minds of the project developers how concept starts. So if I do that in this changing, very diversified market discussion, my role is to make sure my project is ready. Ready for whether that's CORSIA, ready for Article 6, ready for in case voluntary carbon market, or whatever market there may be, or domestic markets. So how do I do that? And then I put myself into the role of a government. Now I'm getting bombarded by visits by project developers saying, I want letter of authorization, and you know, one standard said this, the other standard said this, or an expert said this, and these are the different templates. And then the government sits and says, we also have a template. So there's a lot of myth and misinformation and misguidance in the market. That's why I really appreciate World Bank's leadership in introducing that letter of authorization template. And further, if we really want to have these projects be ready for those markets, we really need consolidated, harmonized instructions on how to do that. And that risk that Dirk talked about, how do we make sure these projects are ready and de-risked, or have that clarity on the risk part. So I'm very much looking forward to World Bank's next moves and next developments in providing that clarity. And at the same time, making sure that the governments have the capacity to access this. And I'm quite inspired by what Ethiopis said on 1,000 projects, and 2,000 of the 200 of those projects, and you only paid out 11 claims. I mean, that's the kind of reassurance the market needs today. So looking forward to that future developments.
Sounds like a little bit of pressure there. Thank you, Margaret. Francesco, we're going to turn to you. And, you know, IRENA, you've recently issued a report on Africa's renewable energy market, underlining the fact that only 2% of global investments in renewable energy in the last 2 decades were made in Africa, with significant regional disparities. And this is also the trend in 2023, if I understand correctly. And we all agree this needs to change. And obviously, IRENA is working to drive that change. Any sense as to how we might be able to combine guarantees under an LOA or otherwise with innovative tools and solutions to increase investments in the African region?
So, first of all, thanks for having me and so IRENA in this debate. I always thought in the last 9 years that I have to pay the price for what we did with Article 6 in Paris. So I think it's been the article in any legal agreement that was written in the worst way possible. And the reason in some way was quite simple, because we are moving from a mandatory system in some way over the Annex 1 of the Kyoto Protocol to a voluntary scheme. And at the time there was also a very strong ideological approach to the rewriting of Article 6. We cannot price nature, no? So at the end, the compromise that came out was an article that was difficult. It's difficult to read it and put in practice. So I think when we started talk with him on this, I took it as a challenge to try to overcome the difficulties in reading and applying that article. We have seen that the first decision that has been taken into this COP has been to welcome the recommendation of the advisory board on Article 6.4. So it seems that also in the COP context, things are moving. And coming to this new approach, and that could be systematic from all the World Bank Group, thanks to the leadership of, we see that it's a great opportunity. And this is an instrument that can really have an impact on closing the gap between the projects and the funding. You know, we have been start working in Africa with also with a new initiative. We say that we want to rewrite the way international cooperation works. So we have this initiative for Africa that's led by African country. We have now under our hands a pipeline of projects that are in a good stage of advancement. It's 2.6 billion of projects. I think this will be the first moment where we will try to understand how far we can go with these tools. So put in practice the instrument and see how we can close the gap where we are from the last state of closing the financial close of the project. So it's a challenge. I'm sure there's a challenge, but so we have the right leadership on this process. We work with all enthusiasm, because this could be a game changer for Africa.
Thank you, Francesco. You guys have been so concise and articulate. We have plenty of time to actually field some questions from the audience. So I'm actually going to turn to the audience and see if there are any questions you'd like to pose of the panelists here. If you could introduce yourself and direct your question to any one of the panelists, please.
Good morning. My name is Connor Fox. I'm a project developer for cleaner cooking in Africa. We have credits from the gold standard with an LOA, and my question is actually to yourself, to Ethiopis. I know it's very difficult when you're launching a product to say what the price is or a service, but how much will the insurance cost in terms of, will it be a percentage of the revenue generated from the sale of the credits, or how do you see it? How do you see the charge being?
We have an internal model for determining the price that we charge, or the premium that we charge for the insurance we provide. And obviously it will differ depending on the country, depending on the sector. But there is a pricing model that we use with a rating system that's internal that determines the premium that we end up charging. So it will vary. It will depend on the market. It will depend on the risk that's being taken. And this, by the way, right now, with the way we're thinking about the cover, the insurance, it will be under our breach of contract cover, which is one of the 4 covers we have under political risk insurance. In essence, looking to cover the commitment that the government is making. And we look at many internal factors in determining what the price should be, what the risk is in the country, and then what the price should be in accordance with that. You have a two-handed comeback. Go ahead, please.
No, I'm just wondering if you know approximately what the range would be in percent.
Oh, it very much depends on the country. I could not give you the range. It depends on where your project is. It depends on the risks in the project. It depends on the risk in the country. So I could not give you right here what that range would be. But happy to have a conversation offline with a few more details. Then we can give you a sense of what it might cost.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All the way in the back there. We hope.
Thank you so much. Really interesting to hear about. My name is Rebecca Iwerks. I'm with Namati and the Grassroots Justice Network. A lot of the communities we work with have found themselves in the middle of carbon projects in the last few years. And their experience, the risk for them, is not understanding what's happening with the project, and then not being able to negotiate a fair benefit sharing agreement, and not receiving all a fair share of revenues as a result. And so I'm wondering how this initiative will address that risk and have those communities that are impacted by the projects be fair players in this scheme as well.
So if there is a project that is supported by MIGA, we in essence have a quadruple bottom line. So the project not only has to be financially viable and commercially viable, it has to be environmentally and socially sustainable. It has to have development impact, and it has to be Paris aligned. If you look at our ENS framework and you look at our development impact framework, we're going to be looking at, in particular under the ENS framework, there's an engagement with the community to be sure that they understand what's happening. We look at the benefits that are going to inure to the community. So because we're a development institution, this is not purely a financial transaction for us. We're looking at the development impact and the ENS sustainability of the project. So for projects we support, there is that benefit, right? We'll be looking at it from the standpoint of not just finance, but from the standpoint of development. And hopefully that would mean where the projects are designed in such a way that they do benefit the communities, and we do take into account their views. Okay, gentleman here, then the gentleman there, and then you behind.
Yeah, and thank you. My question is
If
related.
you could introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Okay, my name is Sebastian Lema. I work as a Climate Finance Director at the Center for Cleaner Policy. Like, what is happening now when you buy like a carbon credit, basically you are buying a risk. Yeah, because you don't know exactly what is going to happen. It will be like the reputational risk for like the company that is buying. And you usually have to face like two different risks. One is the like integrity or the environmental integrity risk, that is you're really reducing greenhouse gas emission. But the other one is like the social risk. I mean, if you're like addressing properly like safeguards or like also benefit sharing. Mm-hmm. So my question is, if with this insurance, are you covering both risks, social and environmental, or only one?
So the risk that we're covering by virtue of, and it would be good to direct some of these questions to the panelists, by the way, that we're covering is the risk against, with respect to revocation of either use or delivery of the carbon credits. But because every time we support a project, we also have to do an ENS assessment as well as a development impact assessment, we're getting to some of the quality issues that you're speaking to, right? But the insurance that we're providing is really against that revocation risk. But it will benefit from the work we necessarily have to do as a development institution, looking at the environmental and social sustainability, both the E and the S, as well as the development impact of the project that's generating the carbon credits. But it might be worthwhile, I don't know, Margaret or Benedict, if you could speak to how you look at these projects from an ENS standpoint, how you look at these projects from a development impact standpoint as well.
I think it's quite important to not raise expectation that the insurance going to take on all the risk that's part of a carbon project, let's say. I think stakeholders across the value chain of that impact delivery holds responsibility for certain aspects of that. So for example, a project developer who holds a lot of risk around the project will start with following the requirements, rules, the safeguards, so that make sure that that social risk is reduced as much as possible. And standards like us or the Article 6 standard body will be there to make sure those requirements are met. And then it goes on to the buyer side and also the political risk that different actors like World Bank comes in to really look at and support. So I think the risk will be shared across the value chain of that impact delivery.
Yeah, perhaps just to add from the country's perspective, when we work on Article 6 collaborations and carbon credits projects, we drive our collaborations across three fronts. The first is the environmental front, where we ensure that the abatement would not have occurred without the carbon credits revenue. So this is required as part of ensuring that whatever that we do is truly additional. The other aspect that we are quite particular and keen on is also what we term the economic benefits. So we want to ensure that all our partnerships are driven upon not just a Singapore-based company, but Singapore-based company working closely with a local company in the host country. This is to ensure that whatever we do has flow-through benefits and creates green jobs, local jobs in the local community itself. And the last piece, I think, touches a lot on what I'd say very broadly, the social development benefits. So we want to ensure that as far as possible, we maximize the SDG benefits that can flow from the project, so as to ensure that whatever we do actually has a clear flow-through component to the local community. So when we work on these multiple fronts, our perspective is that although it may result in the credit prices being higher, for example, if I need to do a just transition component in order to ensure sustainable development benefits, which we're doing for some of our energy projects, the cost will definitely go up. But overall, it makes the project more sustainable. Yeah. It manages some of the risks that can flow from the project itself, which then hopefully will translate to an insurance product that is more cost effective. Thanks.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Benedict. Please, go ahead.
Hi there, my name is Brad Kieran, work with a global carbon project developer and trader called WeAct, and we're working through our own Article 6 authorisation processes and hopefully coming into the MIGA process as well. So very excited about that opportunity and the opportunities that CORSIA present to us. One of the things that we're trying to understand and the questions that we get from prospective buyers is with insurance products, a couple of things: who holds the insurance, who bears that? Is it the holder of the asset through the life cycle, or is it the originator of the project? But then also, as we, I guess, in CORSIA are in a market where we understand there's large demand coming and we're structurally short in the market at the moment for eligible credits. And one of those things with insurance is then if there is a default and compensation has to be made, how do you replace credits in a market where you're structurally short? And is there, I guess, a ramp up or thinking about how we manage compensation, I guess, in the first few years versus, you know, the perfect product ongoing? So it's, I guess, a two-parter for everyone.
All right, why don't we, for change, start with somebody else? Would you mind, Marie, do you have, or Benedict or Margaret, you want to address this at all as buyers?
So let me talk about CORSIA, because I think it's important that, because we had to think about the terms and conditions under gold standard when we were applying for CORSIA eligibility, and one of the things that's going to be important is the ability for project developer to have that insurance or have that ability to compensate in case of any cancellation of those credits. So I think it's quite important that the project developer holds that responsibility. However, I think this is something that I'm probably going to be asking for a bigger group for collective support, is in this world where buyers are asking for these assurances, are we not intentionally marginalizing very small projects, very local projects who just can't afford this complexity in the market? And I think this is a really important point to consider if we're really serious about using effective market mechanism to deliver that climate impact, deliver that sustainable impact, because are we not trying to complicate the market in order to satisfy the buyer's confidence and needs, and unintentionally marginalizing those projects? So as we go forward, as World Bank and MIGA thinks about that insurance products and support to countries, it's going to be important to think about that aspect so that project developers who really can't afford this still can be inclusive to the market access. Yeah.
Go ahead, Benedict, please.
Yeah. So I think the first premise that we work with is that while project developers, especially small project developers, would want the risk to be completely minimized, we recognize through the work that we have done that it is not always possible. In fact, eliminating the risk completely generally would translate to an insurance product that is incredibly high priced. So there's some residual risk that I think the various players will need to bear. And I think that the broader issue here is how can you share that residual risk in an equitable manner? And how do you minimize it as far as possible? And there are a few things that we try to do. One is working with the host country for us is absolutely important. So a very strong and robust capacity building program with the host country to ensure that it has the right infrastructure, it has the right regulatory framework that is put in place. We think that actually does help minimize the risk significantly, which is why in many of the agreements that we work with in countries, one of the things that we always ask for is, do you have a national framework? Do you have a national framework with regulations that is legally binding? Because if not, if you collaborate with a party that doesn't have that, then it exposes you to a much higher level of risk. The other thing which we do, I think, which leverages a lot on how crediting independent standards operate, is to leverage on the renewal of the crediting period to review the program and, if necessary, to make changes. So you don't bind everybody in a straitjacket itself, because if you do that, then you just load on the risk to a very large extent. And finally, we put out rules and regulations for the Singapore government in terms of what we are willing to whitelist and what we're willing to accept. But we are also appreciative of the fact that changes will happen. And when we make changes in our regulations, changes in our rules, there's always a lead time. And which means that in the lag before the lead time, if there are things that change which are beyond our control, and actually government also bears part of the risk as well. So it goes back to my earlier point about how do you share the risk in an equitable fashion? And beyond that, whatever that you cannot share, I think that's where an insurance product would actually come in to pick up the rest. And I think we think that's a more efficient and a more equitable allocation. Thanks.
And thanks to Benedict and Maggie for fielding a question which probably is more directed at MIGA. But let me say that the product, the LOA, and the cover under that LOA, the way it's designed, it can be extended to either a buyer or the project developer, right? Now, Maggie's made a very good point about thinking about the affordability of the cover for small project developers, right? But we've designed it in such a way that it's flexible and can be extended to either of those parties. Now, with respect to replacement credits, the reason I made the point about our track record is because what we're hoping, by virtue of how we have historically handled the potential for a government to not meet its commitment, is to step in and make sure that it does, all right? Obviating the need for replacement credits. However, should we fail, and despite Maggie's excitement at our track record, we could, but then it's going to be a payout, right? And not replacement credits. We won't have replacement credits to provide, all right? This gentleman was next, and then I think one more question. Oh, I'm sorry, Maria. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we totally want to maximize the money that goes to the country in question. There's no doubt about it. But I can't resist this opportunity to say that the affordability for the buyer is also a concern. It's a huge concern for airlines. And I just want to share with you guys that airlines have a 3% profit margin, net profit margin. Yeah, oil companies are in the vicinity of 20%. Just saying, yeah. And this equates to $6 per passenger. That's the profit that airlines make today. So we see this wall of costs coming towards us that really we need to share those costs. We need to spread those risks around all the stakeholders, because if we don't do that, we will simply not have aviation in the future. I don't mean to be a tear-jerker here, yeah? But, we're in a global energy transition together, and that is what we're committed to. And we're seeing, fees for certifications, fees for releasing the LOAs. Everybody's got dollar signs in their eyes, and this takes money away from the countries, and it makes the product much more expensive. So we all have to together fight all of these unnecessary administrative costs. And of course, MIGA is doing that by offering their products at rock bottom fees.
I was not aware of that, but in any event, this is a cost, right? And as everybody is indicating, we'll have to think through how best to manage the cost of providing insurance, whether it's a buyer or a project developer, particularly the smaller project developers. Please, you were next, and then there's the gentleman in the back, and then I think we're going to be rapidly running out of time. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Lev Gantley. I'm a private practice lawyer. I do a lot of work around CORSIA, letters of authorization, Article 6, etc. So the way I broadly think about it, there are two big risks with LOAs. The first is withdrawal or revocation, and the second is around change, right? And in that second bucket, what might change look like to an LOA? And I think really, probably, if I was guessing, it would touch on volumes and the price for the corresponding adjustment. I had a client call me last night, and they said, Lev, do you have any idea what the price of a corresponding adjustment is in country X and Y? Because the project developer is telling me today that it's actually $3. But it's a multi-million-dollar 7-year investment, and I don't know if the host country is not going to raise the price over that 7-year period. How do we protect against that risk? And I sort of talked them through various options. One of them was to put in some firm language around not uplifting the price in the LOA and include an arbitration clause. And he said, great, will MIGA be able to ensure that? And I said, I don't know, but they are launching an LOA tomorrow, and I haven't seen the latest version, and so I'm not sure if the risk that's covered in the LOA, and indeed by the MIGA guarantee product, just deals with the revocation or cancellation risk, or if it captures the change in price of a CA risk as well, because at the end of the day, this investor wants to ultimately sell to airlines, and they need to know what the price is going to be over the entire life of the project. Does that make sense, the question?
It does make sense. The short answer is it's a template, and it's a template for a reason, right? In other words, it's a document we expect will need to be negotiated on a case-by-case basis. There's some fundamentals important to us to be able to ensure. There has to be an insurable right, and that's why we worked on this template. But the provisions as to what would be covered and how that would be covered, that's something that can be negotiated. I can't say whether or not we'd be able to cover the risk that you're suggesting, but certainly there's flexibility in the template to consider that. Okay. All right. Last question, and please, if you could direct it to a panelist, that would be great.
Pleasure. It would be a pleasure. My name is Jeff Berman. I come from a company called Expansive. We are a digital infrastructure provider. A question for Maggie. Higher, kind of like big picture, do you see the role or the operations of a standards body kind of evolving a little bit with these insurance products? And kind of where my mind is immediately going is, developing new methodologies, new standards that are kind of just, or new regions that are just going to be inherently a little bit more risky than something that's been done before.
No, I think in the era where we started to see that compliance markets come through, I think we need to think about the origination of the carbon markets, like in terms of especially the voluntary carbon market, because a lot of inherently high risk ideas were originated by this market. The type of projects, the type of activities that's not business as usual, that were not introduced to the traditional investment markets, that had a chance to access finance. So I think that spirit has to continue. However, I understand the market's maturing. And with various compliance markets, it's maturing and it's requiring insurances and all kinds of risk mitigation. So I think we do need to think about it from a standard perspective. How do we support, because our number one client are the project developers. How do we make sure these project developers can deliver impact on the ground? And as a standard, what's the extent to the risk that we're willing to share? And what's the extent to clarity that we're willing to give on that risk-bearing process? I think it's something that we're working on. We're working with various stakeholders around this room to make sure that we're ready for that, and that, therefore, our project developers are ready for it.
So you can see the LOA really is a testament to strong collaboration among a range of stakeholders, approaching it from different vantage points, but driving in the same direction. Maggie, Benedict, Marie, Francesco, thank you very much. A round of applause for our panelists, please. Thank you.